So Andy is a adjunct professor in our law school at University of Texas at Austin, and also CEO of Jupiter Power. So I'll let Andy say a bit more about that. All right.
Apologies for that.
Woo! Great. So can you see, what do you see on your side? Do you see anything?
I can see you on the stage and several chairs next to you. And now I've got a close-up of you. And 2 cactuses.
Yeah, these are real.
Awesome. Love them.
I almost touched some of the spikes, but when I realized they were real, I didn't want to get hurt. So where are you, Andy?
I am in Ohio at the moment, and I apologize for not being there in person. It looks like a great agenda that you guys had, and I was looking forward to seeing it.
Well, we miss you. You know, this is a between 2 cacti, right? And
yes, it's hard for me to be there. I can see them. I'm there spiritually, if not in body. So.
Yeah. No, well, I appreciate you taking the time.
Recording in progress.
Oh man. Well, okay. We're gonna start here. But so Andy, I kind of gave a brief introduction to you, but before you joined, but maybe you can just tell us a bit about your role at UT and what you do right now, I guess, for Jupiter Power and all of that.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I'm an adjunct over at the law school, and I teach a class every couple of years. It's called Entrepreneurialism and Climate Change. And it's open. It's been open to law students and students at other graduate schools. I've taught that for, I think, about 10 years now, so for a while. But my day job is in renewable energy. Currently, I'm at Jupiter Power. We started Jupiter in 2017, so we're 7 or 8 years into it. Jupiter is an energy storage company. And we have about 13 operating projects, about 3 gigawatt hours of batteries that we're operating in the market every day or in the middle of constructing. We have about 150 employees, and we are backed by an infrastructure fund that's a part of BlackRock.
So tell us a little bit about your journey into energy. I remember talking to you a bit about, I guess, how you got into batteries, but where does your origin story start?
Okay. Well, I am an old timer in the renewable energy business. I went to UT graduate school. I did the joint program with the law school and the LBJ school, and graduated in 1995. And in 1997, I started working on the side on one of the first wind projects in Texas, the Southwest Mesa project way out in West Texas. And that work led to me accepting a full-time position at a company called Texas Wind Power. I started there in 1998. And for a long time, we did several large wind projects. I left there and started my own company in 2001. We did a lot more wind projects. Eventually, that company was sold to an Irish company called Airtricity, and then Airtricity was sold to a German company called E.ON Climate and Renewables, which is now it's part of another German company called RWE, which is still based in Austin. And I left there in 2009 and started a company called Pioneer Green Energy. We did a number of wind projects, and then the first solar projects that I did were with Pioneer. The first solar project in Maryland, our company developed. Other projects in California and elsewhere. And I left there in 2015 and started Jupiter in 2017. And the thing that you learn working in renewables, whether it's wind or solar, is how incredibly useful energy storage would be. On a real windy day, every wind project in Texas is generating a ton of power. In the middle of a sunny day, every solar project is belting it out. But then, those resources vary. And so it's great to have something that can soak up when there's a lot of generation and then make it available when there isn't as much. And so that's what led me into energy storage. And most of the folks that work at Jupiter have experience in coming from renewables.
Cool. So when you started Jupiter, was the battery technology ready for you all, or did you have to wait a little bit for the batteries to be
Yeah.
ready?
One of the really interesting things is how quickly battery technology has evolved. And I was visiting with one of the founders of CATL, which is the biggest battery manufacturer in the world, a Chinese company, a few years ago. And he was telling me the story about how when he was younger and looking for new technologies to focus on, he had become aware of a professor at the University of Texas, John Goodnow, who had done some exciting research into lithium-ion as a means of storing energy. And they came over and visited with him and ended up working from that same technology. At the time that we were starting in 2017, lithium-ion batteries were around and had been installed in a few places, but the industry was extremely young. The very first energy storage projects had been installed using lead acid batteries, which are the same batteries that that you'd use in a car. Those systems got replaced in kind of the mid-teens, and the technology was pretty good, but kind of expensive at that time. But more than anything, there weren't many market structures for deploying energy storage. There wasn't a really way to make money with them because it didn't exist as a technology. And so you basically had to act like you were a gas plant and sell dispatchable power or sell ancillary services that were designed for gas, for firm power plants. Those were the first things that we could deploy into for market revenues.
Was bankability of the lithium-ion batteries or the batteries you were using an issue initially? I guess, people talk about, having a bank has to sort of certify a loan or whatnot and be sure the technology is ready for prime time. And you have a technology being rapidly developed and ready for deployment. Was that an issue? And if so, how did you cross that barrier?
Yeah. It was very much an issue. I remember buying the first batteries that we installed on a project. We did 3 small distributed generation projects, were the very first ones that we built. And I remember going through the warranty documents and wondering if they were going to be financeable, the vendor. And I remember asking, could we see some operating history on these units? Could we see a couple years worth of, how well they did and how they compare to the degradation curve that's being warranted? And they said, these units that we'll be delivering to you next year are completely different than anything that we've ever built. And the rate of change in these batteries is such that the stuff we'll build a year after that will be very different. And so for years, none of the projects that we built were financeable. We built them on balance sheet. We had a very bold backer, InCap, a private equity group out of Houston, and they were very bold and decisive in supporting us. And so we built the first 6 projects that we started with completely on balance sheet. Later, we went back and financed them as a portfolio based on their operating history, and we were able to raise debt on those projects. And generally, they've performed really well ever since. but it continues to be the case that this technology changes very, very quickly, and is pretty different one year to the next.
So on that note, I think I've asked you once about sodium-ion batteries. I was just last week at SUNY Binghamton giving a seminar and talked to Stan Whittingham a bit about sodium-ion batteries, future of lithium-ion batteries, a bit about potassium-ion batteries. For those, Stan Whittingham is one of the Nobel Prize winners with John Goodenough for lithium-ion battery. What are your thoughts on sodium-ion batteries? Stan was actually very negative about them, but I remember the last time I talked to you, I think you were like, "Oh yeah, we're already testing them in the field or something." I don't remember what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're very excited about the sodium technology. It's great. We see two ends of the spectrum. The first is that CATL, the company I mentioned earlier, biggest battery manufacturer in the world, they are going pretty strongly into sodium technologies, and their first sodium batteries are out. We're also seeing some exciting startups here in the U.S. We've recently closed an agreement with Peak Energy, which is a U.S. startup that's totally focused on sodium-ion systems. So it's a real thing, and in my opinion, it's coming along very well, and there are some real advantages. One is that the systems, the nature of the chemistry is that it runs at a much cooler temperature, and so we don't need air conditioning units. We don't need HVAC as part of our kit. If you look at a modern lithium-ion system, they're containerized, and most of the container is the cells and the operating systems for the battery. But then a significant part, maybe 15% of the container is HVAC to manage the heat that those systems create. With a sodium system, the very first one we'll be installing for Jupiter next year on a test basis, they don't even have an HVAC attached to them. So we get to use that as extra space for batteries. The storage is a little bit less dense, but because we get that extra room, they're quite comparable. Two other things. One is sodium is a lot cheaper than lithium, which helps manage the cost, which gets us better able to get them out into the market. And then the other is these heat properties are such that they're so much better for sodium that some of the vendors are saying that they expect they will be able to seek inflammable product designation for these batteries down the road. There have been some fires with lithium batteries over the years, less and less, and with modern equipment, very few of these fires exist. But there's some hope on the sodium side that we could be seeing that issue go away completely. That's a few years away, and we'll see if they do it. But it's headed in that direction, and we're excited about that.
That's super interesting. So for the current, I guess, political state of affairs with China, is any of the tension with China affecting your business? And what do you think the long-term perspective is for the energy industry, for solar, for batteries that is so reliant on China for the manufacturing these pieces of equipment?
Yeah. For a variety of reasons, China has really become the cheapest manufacturer by a significant margin for solar equipment and then for batteries. The Inflation Reduction Act was, I think, a really well-designed piece of legislation that was going to see a lot of those manufacturing jobs for batteries and solar panels and everything else come over to the U.S. We were seeing just a vast number of battery manufacturing plants getting started here all across the U.S. as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. Really created kind of a whole ecosystem of support for domestic manufacturing, even by Chinese companies here or partnering, a bunch of different approaches. I think everybody's familiar with the really substantial change that has occurred at the federal level in energy policy coming out of the OBBBA. And one of the biggest changes has been on the tax credit front, particularly for wind and solar. Batteries continue to be treated the same that they had been, but the biggest thing that's happened with batteries, and it affects wind and solar as well, is the FEOC, the foreign entity of concern provisions of the bill. And what these do is make it almost impossible for new Chinese equipment to be sold in the U.S. Or even to be manufactured here, depending on certain percentages and ownership structures. And so we're seeing on the one hand a continuation of favorable policies for storage, but we're seeing some real constraints on the availability of equipment. We're seeing some new U.S. startups move quickly, and we're seeing some other companies expanding manufacturing operations here. The other big thing that's happened is policy on EVs was driving a lot of the battery manufacturing, and that policy has changed, very negatively. So a lot of the manufacturing plants that were being built here aren't seeing the same kind of market in EVs. Ironically, they're starting to see it in stationary storage, the kinds of projects that we build. So there's a huge amount of uncertainty that's come out of this. Tariffs are the other big thing in the background, and they make it extremely difficult, both for the kind of equipment that we're talking about, batteries and solar and other generation equipment. Even gas turbines are come from, many of them from Europe or from Mexico or Brazil or elsewhere. Main power transformers, many of them come from abroad, and those have been subject to really huge tariffs coming and going. So all of that has made it really difficult this year to make, big long-term decisions. But in theory, that's going to calm down, and maybe we'll have a more stable environment.
So, I mean, it's interesting when you talk about the current federal policies related to batteries versus, say, solar, ITC, PTC, the residential sort of tax credit. I mean, it's I don't know. Why do you think batteries are treated differently than solar? And I guess my real question is, why do you think solar has become such a political hot button right now?
Yeah,
which it is. I don't know. Maybe we can debate whether it's a political hot button, but it seems like it is.
Yeah, it does seem like it has become a political hot button. Solar is it's so cheap, and there's so much of it in process all over the country. It's domestic, it's clean. There are so many reasons why you might think it would be a nonpartisan issue or a bipartisan issue, but that is not the case. It's hard to understand also because there's so much talk these days about the need for new generation, and in particular, data center driven. In fact, there's an executive order to get as much generation into the market as possible to support the advantage that we have in AI internationally. And yet at the same time, these policy changes are making the quickest, the cheapest generation that can be brought to market, which is by and far largely solar power. It's really given that a very short runway. You can't buy new gas turbines. Basically they're sold out for the next several years. So it's not really clear where all of this new generation is going to come from. I can't give you a good answer for why solar has become so divisive. There's a lot of support for it because it's clean and it's cheap, and it's domestic. Those are three things that are really wonderful. Why is storage different? I think part of the reason is that storage is firm power. There are consequences to introducing a huge amount of non-dispatchable power, which is wind and solar power that just comes and goes when the resource shows up. Grid, there are some challenges associated with keeping everything fully powered all the time. I mean, those issues have been managed really well. But storage is firm power. Storage, you can tell it when to dispatch and tell it when to sit idle and tell it when to charge. As the grids evolve, the need for firm power has become really important. Even when you look at data centers and their profile of power consumption, there's very rapid changes in consumption that can be hard on grids. And having something, a form of generating power that's almost instantaneous, like a battery, and that can actually absorb extra generation. Sometimes grids have too much generation, and batteries can be useful for that too. It's a really useful technology, and I'd like to think that had something to do with the way that federal policy unfolded. But honestly, I don't. We studied it so closely. We're very involved in Washington all year, and I'm not in a position to tell you, exactly what happened and why we ended up on one side of things and other technologies on the other side.
Yeah, you mentioned the role of business model for the batteries. That was been part of what Jupiter Power has done. I think we do a lot of entrepreneurship and innovation programs here, and talking to students and getting them excited about thinking about maybe a startup company and everything. I think students tend to get really hung up on the technical details, and like you just mentioned, there are all these challenges with batteries when you started Jupiter Power, but there are also challenges with no existing business model. How are you going to make money from these sorts of things? And I read your book. I was trying to remember the name of it. Is about the little power plant that saved Texas or something. What is your book's title? Your book's title?
It's a much bigger deal than that in the title. It's called the West Texas Power Plant That Saved the World.
Oh, Save the World. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But that book, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that book was essentially about a business model structure for solar, right? And kind of this little first solar plant and how impactful that was. But maybe can you say a little bit about the role of business model creation when we're thinking about clean tech companies and all that, and deep tech or hard tech or whatever people call it? It's also business model creation. And can you say something about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because it goes to the heart, I think, of entrepreneurial endeavors. If you have a really good idea, it's about something that doesn't exist today, but you think will fit into the world in the future. That's at its core what entrepreneurialism is about. And sometimes there is an existing business model out there. The book From Zero to One talks a lot about that, and how, sometimes you have to invent a whole business model, and sometimes you're more or less, using one that's already out there. I've done both of those in my business past. I think what was really interesting and challenging about energy storage is, like you say, I mean, this technology didn't really exist before at scale. And we've had to do so many things at Jupiter that we just had to kind of invent. We had to invent a way to optimize a battery's dispatch, to make the decisions 5-minutely increment by 5-minutely increment, whether to charge, discharge, or stand pat. Doing that from a spreadsheet all the way to very complex programming and AI guided decision making that we use now, has been quite a voyage. I think a really good idea is definitionally going to require you to face problems like that and invent the business model. And on the one hand, that's scary and difficult, and you're going to take some risks, and they're not all going to work out. On the other hand, that's how you introduce change to the world. That's how you create something really valuable, is by figuring out a better way, a new way. And so it's a risk worth taking. It can be very difficult, I think, to manage all the balls in the air to get a venture off the ground, and to grow it, from a fledgling state into a walking state, and then hopefully a running state. But it's really worth doing. The world needs a lot more of it, and there's a really great path that's been etched out in the energy world. I mean, you could look back over the last 100 years, especially in a place like Texas, there have been so many of these, fresh approaches to energy all the way back to oil and gas, and shale and wind and solar, and now batteries. It's a great place to do it, and UT has an incredible program that has an obvious record of success with all kinds of graduates and people involved.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Andy. We got to call it quits here. Really appreciate you joining. I know you wanted to be here, and
Yeah,
but still really enjoyed the conversation, and have a nice dinner there. We're gonna enjoy our drinks over here. So, thanks, Andy.
wonderful.
Thanks so much.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you.